Sometimes when doors have been closed in my life, God has opened new windows in answer to my prayers. So many ways I never dreamed of. The car accident for me redirected my time in many directions. Great career going, high-level executive. I did all kinds of things, headed organizations. I was busy, and all of a sudden the road said stop. At the age of 29, I was hit by a drunk driver in the middle of the afternoon. I was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, unconscious, with very much pain and dangerously low blood pressure. I remained there for quite a while. The interesting thing that started it off was the morning after the accident, my sister-in-law was babysitting with the children while Mardell was at the hospital with me. My sister-in-law got a call from my mother-in-law, Viv. Viv was way up north, way out in the boonies, no way to get to a telephone, no way to get to a radio, and something forced her to have her husband drive her to a phone and call home and find out where I was. And my sister-in-law said, no, he's fine, he's okay. And my mother-in-law said, no, I know he's hurt. I know he's in a hospital. To this day, none of us can figure out how she knew that or why she called. The first 3 years for me were physically very limiting. I could barely walk. I wore a brace and had difficulty moving or turning my head. I had a lot of discomfort and pain. It was difficult to even sit. I wasn't sure whether or not I would be able to continue to work, but fortunately Johnson Wax was a great company, and they did everything they could to accommodate me and to try to encourage me to keep going. One of the blessings for me, for example, from God, was to be blessed with the right vice president to report to when I was first a young executive. My role at my employer was a major one. I reported to the vice president of HR, but I also had a direct reporting relationship to the owner of our company that nobody really knew about. So there were two relationships there. I worked often with the board of directors, worked directly with the management committees. I had a very responsible job, and I was asked to travel a lot to help our different subsidiaries overseas. And my boss, Roger Mulholland, I'll mention his name, he's a wonderful man. He made sure that because I had to travel with those limitations, that they would make special provisions whenever they wanted me to go somewhere. I can't thank him enough for that. He also made any other special adjustments I might have needed. My days were long, but he found ways to make it possible for me to carry through all of those things. I'm still very limited physically with ankylosing spondylitis, though I don't talk about that to people. A lot of people don't know. For me, it was a big change from being an athlete. I came from a family of athletes. There were star athletes all over the place. For me, at this point in my life, I was bowling with my wife, Mardell. I was still actively playing baseball, which was a sport that I excelled at. And I was golfing with friends. I'll share one aspect of ankylosing spondylitis, which is a real toughie. Some of this really affected my health. It certainly meant drastic changes for me and my family. There are so many physical limitations. In all truth, ankylosing spondylitis has a broad range of effect on people. And one of them is a fair amount of pain, which I have all the time, and discomfort in many parts of my body. Movement is affected because of how it affects the joints, including my neck, my shoulders, my back, my arms, and even my hands and fingers, and my legs, my joints. I use a cane a little more often now. An interesting thing is that 3 persons volunteered to take me back and forth to work while I couldn't drive. Again, I couldn't turn my head, I couldn't move my shoulders, things were problematic. And these gentlemen did it for 3 years, no complaints, never looked for a way out, always were there to help. Now, that's one part of the story. The other part happened when I was about 34 years old. Mardell was pregnant with our sixth child. We lost one along the way. We were just getting adjusted to my physical limitations and my energy limitations, and things are going fairly well for us. But what happened is my wife came down with encephalitis. She was talking about, Ed, what's that? Who's walking on the ceiling? And I thought she was kidding around. We often kidded around. But I began to realize that she was serious. So I rushed her to the hospital. And the things we learned weren't very good. First of all, she had an exceedingly high fever. She was paralyzed on her left side, and her memory was not what it should be. Among the things that changed definitely were memory, and with encephalitis often comes a personality change. Both were in high order for us. I was not sure from October until January whether Mardell or the baby would make it. And if they survived, I wasn't sure how they'd survive. There were lots of deep prayers. There was nowhere to turn. Prayers were frequent, morning and night, many I can assure you with tears. Greg was born 4 months later, about 3 p.m, and as he reminds me, the hour of divine mercy. How about that for an answer to a prayer? God blessed us with both surviving, but the journey was not an easy one. For contrast, my cousin Bob Mankowski, who's been like a brother to me, lives in Arizona. His oldest daughter, who was a real sweetheart, I got to know her when she was younger, would later marry, would later have a family, and she too came down with encephalitis. Only her journey back was not anything like Mardell's. Her journey back was if she wanted to get out of her chair to go from one room to another, what she would have to do is write herself a note, because by the time she left the chair and get to the other room, she could not remember why she left there. The marriage was strained. The husband would eventually divorce. Situations went, like they do so often, from bad to worse. She's now had several brain surgeries, and for the last number of years has been living in a nursing home. It was not easy to take care of her in any way, shape, or form. So by comparison, when I contrast Mardell and Greg, and what I know she went through, I know that I've had God's help along the way. I can assure you that constant and very deep prayer were and still are my constant companions. I had to adjust to new windows that were opened by God in far different ways, including discovering some new avenues to be able to engage more with my children. Physical restraints are really tough because I couldn't play games with them. I couldn't physically engage with them. I wore both braces in both hands, including going to work. For example, some things I had were bouts with something called iritis. You can check it out for yourself, but it's kind of a wicked thing. Both knees of mine had to be replaced. Despite my now significant physical limitations, I went in a bunch of new directions. And I had to do something new to have some interactive time with my children. For example, one thing that we did is we'd sit in a circle on the floor. I'd start a story idea, and the next child would pick up on it, and the next child, and the next child, and the next child. And the last person on the floor would finish the story. We did that quite often. And there were other things that I also got into for the kids. In order to engage with them, I started inventing games. The side part of it was I got to sell the games. Now, is that a miracle? Is that a prayer answered? I'm sure at least it's a prayer answered from God. Little by little, God opened new windows for us. Some slowly, but they were opened in so many ways. The best I can say is thank you, God. I love you, God. I'm not an expert at what the church might say is and what is not a miracle by any means. But I do know that so many prayers have been answered. and that so many windows of help and opportunity have been opened for me and for my family when we have needed them, sometimes in ways I did not expect. Some of those windows were open when some major doors were closed. Okay, what is a miracle? The church is careful in terms of what it officially calls and recognizes as a miracle. All I can do in the time that I have with you is share with you about some things from my life and those close to me and how they happened. For me, the nature of them probably falls into several categories. The first category would be prayers answered. In my heart, I certainly feel that some can at least be called gifts from God. I'll try to share some of that along the way over a long period of time that they happened when dealing with some very challenging situations. And I certainly feel that so many prayers were answered in so many ways. Some of the answers to prayers helped to push away more than a few tears. The next form of prayers being answered, I think, sometimes come in the form of people that show up in our lives in so many ways. Some so unexpectedly and some without asking them. Some at just the right time. And some that made changes of directions that were important and without looking for them or the help that they brought. There are so many examples in my life. For example, when I was a young man, my Aunt Gertrude came in to live with us for 3 years. That was unusual because she would go from family to family to family and stay. The reason? She was disabled. At the age of 16, she contracted spinal meningitis. And she had great difficulty with her back and with walking. Her walking will consist of moving one leg forcibly forward and dragging the other along to catch up with her. But despite that, she was the sweetest lady you could ever know. When she stayed with us, she taught me the rosary, and she taught me praying to God for help. A lot of my faith as its root in the time she spent with us. There's a fascinating story about her I guess I should share here. When she was about her mid-50s, my mom and dad had a business. They lived upstairs and the business was downstairs. Well, one day my Aunt Gertrude came down to visit with them, and just as she did, a fellow walked in and asked for directions. And she and he got into a conversation of some sort. Well, the conversation led to the two falling in love. In her later 50s, they were married. The beauty of it all was her health went down her very fast from there, and she was wheelchair bound. And this gentleman took care of her for the rest of her life. Talk about prayers answered, maybe this is another. And I mentioned the cancer. Well, some years later, I had a bout with cancer. It was my second. The first bout happened when I was in my early 30s. The doctor said, Ed, you're either going to come out with one kidney, 2 kidneys, or no kidneys. You have cancer. This was the old way of testing for it. The procedures weren't as good as they are now. Well, I prayed a lot. And all I know is I came out and the doctor says, Ed, you've got both kidneys. Well, they only had to take one with cancer-like cells. So from that time until just about roughly 2 years ago, I was cancer-free. Okay, I found out I had cancer. I found out I was going to have an operation in a week, and I was visiting at my son Greg's house. When I knew I had cancer, I just learned about it a few days before, and I was scheduled for surgery. I called Father Rookie again, said, Father, I've got cancer, going to have surgery. And what he did is says, okay, Ed, say this prayer with me. He had me say a prayer over the phone. The good news is it turned out so great. Despite 2 major tumors, no more cancer, no more need for chemo or radiation. I started talking about health issues on my journey and how that's affected my life. And I'm going to take one very specific one that deals
with one of the spiritual works of mercy, and I think you'll see why in a minute. The way this all started out is I had double knee replacement surgery, which was a continuation of a health issue that I've had over the years now. So I had double knee replacement surgery, and all went really well until one day my left knee swelled up to a giant size. So I went back to the knee doctor and said, "Hey doc, I got a problem." And the doctor says, "Well, no, I don't think it's so bad." So I quickly went to another doctor, and he said, "Oh my gosh, Ed, you have to take that left knee out. We're gonna have to redo that surgery." I wasn't ready for what was gonna happen next, because what it required is that I had to go into a nursing home. I had to have a place where I could stay for a number of months. I had no idea how long it was going to be, but it was going to be, as it turned out, 4 months. What they had to do first is take out the infected replacement knee, okay, and then they had to give me disinfectant to try to get rid of the infection before it spread anywhere. And then when that was done, then it would be able to replace that temporary knee with another permanent knee. So in essence, I would have 3 knees before it was all done. What I wasn't too familiar with was just how tough that journey was going to be. My family drove up from Racine to Milwaukee, where I was. Surgery was done at St. Luke's Hospital. And so it's roughly an hour trip each way. And my wife and my son Greg made the trip diligently. My other children joined in when they could. Friends stopped to see me, and I soon learned what it was like to be in a nursing home. It was a long journey. You have a lot of time to think, and thank goodness for the people that took the time to come and see me. One of the things I learned in the nursing home with spare time is how to really enjoy the rosary, how to enjoy the chapel of Divine Mercy, how to really focus on my faith. It was a real faith journey for me in addition to the health journey. Now, it's important that you visit folks who are sick in a hospital or a nursing home. And where this proved out to be so critical and so important was when my son Greg came to see me one day. I said, "Son, they're going to do surgery tomorrow. They're going to replace the temporary knee." And he said, "What are you talking about, Dad? You're not ready for that." I said, "Well, the doc says it's all scheduled, ready to go." Well, Greg, being the brave guy he was, went and talked to folks at the nursing home. And it got to be 10 o'clock at night. He and my wife were still there. And Greg prevailed and said, "My dad is not healthy, and you know it, and surgery wouldn't be a good thing." So they called the hospital at the last minute at Greg's persistence, and the surgery was put off for several more weeks. My whole point is because one of the family members was so diligent and persistent, he saved my life because I was not ready for that surgery. But I did come back from that very well, and that's about 12, 13 years ago now. One of the interesting things that happened while I was at the nursing home, I can tell you one of my best friends was one of my cousins. While at Marquette University, he and I played on the same intramural basketball team for years, double dated, we did all that kind of thing. We both graduated at the same time. He went in the Army on the West Coast, I went in the Army on the East Coast, and we hadn't seen each other for years. Well, one day while I'm at the nursing home, this is how I think God works sometimes, I heard this voice as somebody was walking down the hall. And I called out to one of the nurses and said, "Could you have that person come back?" It turned out it was my good buddy, my good cousin Bob. We reunited and have had many good times together since again. So the point is, I think that God does work in many good ways. He does help us when we need it, maybe not always the way we expect, but God is always there for us. An unusual thing happened. I went for a routine checkup with my doctor. The only catch is my doctor had stepped away for illness and a new doctor was in his place. This was only my second visit with that new doctor, okay? He didn't know me very well yet. And he checked me over and I'm ready to go home. And for some reason, he and my son Greg got into this conversation about pets. And Greg said, Doc, something funny is going on. I've got this little pet green bird. And that green bird used to step up to my dad and chirp with my dad. And all of a sudden, he won't come. Bird won't come. She won't come. And Doc said, wait, what about a bird? And Greg said, no, this bird won't come to my dad. And they were very close at one time. And Doc said, wait, let me tell you about some animals detecting health issues. So he said, I'm going to schedule your dad for a test. Is that okay? I'm just a little nervous about this. And it was the best thing that could have happened because it turned out I had cancer. They detected it. They operated within a week. And the cancer, they caught all inside the kidney, 2 major tumors. Had it gone much further, it would have been too late. So imagine that sequence of my son talking about a bird that wouldn't come to me anymore and the doc putting it together and detecting cancer. Well, God is good. He works in lots of different ways. Before the surgery for cancer, I did call my friend Father Peter Mary Rookie one morning, and Father says, Ed, let's say a little prayer together. And that's what we did. The result was, when the doctor came through, he says, Ed, we just caught that in time. 2 huge tumors inside your kidney. Now we have to see if you need chemo or radiation treatment, and I'll send you to the cancer doctor. So a short time later, I went to visit the cancer doctor. He said, Ed, the news is you don't need either chemo or radiation. I don't know what you call that, but just catching the kidney just in the nick of time. No radiation, no chemo, all caught because a bird didn't want to step up to me is a pretty amazing thing from my vantage point. Sometimes when doors have been closed in my life, God has opened new windows in answer to my prayers. God has filled my life with wonderful things to replace the things I can't do anymore.